Hi, I'm Keith Bensel. Welcome back to another episode of Rooftops and Rent Rolls. And so today we're going to just dive into 10 things you must do when you take over a new property. And so I've done this anytime I've taken over management of a new property, whether it be that I'm buying it or whether it be that I'm managing it for someone. And so these are 10 things you must do when you take over a new property. Number one, you have to get a rent roll, right? You need the information on anybody that's there, as well as your rent roll should be listing any vacancies that are in that property. And so you want to do a full lease audit off of that rent roll so that you make sure that all the files are in proper order. And so you have everything, you have signed leases on every unit that's occupied, and so you want to verify rents, deposits, all those kinds of things, lease dates, make sure you have all the information that the rent roll matches the leases and information you have in the tenant files. The next thing obviously is you're going to collect all the keys, codes, and access information. And so it's important to make sure that you have all the keys. If there's a master key, if there's just, the regular key system, if there's a security alarm code for any specific tenant units or anything like that, you need to have the alarm codes, you need to have the keys. Make sure that if there's laundry equipment, you're getting the keys for that laundry equipment. Especially if you're responsible for checking to make sure that they're emptied on a regular basis as far as the change that's in them or what have you. And next, you want to schedule a full property inspection. This is where you're going through every corner of the property, the mechanical rooms, roofs, sample units. You don't, even though I say full property inspection, you're not going through every single occupied unit at this point, but you want to get a darn good feel of the property. And then later on, you're going to go through every single unit. We'll talk about that in a minute. But when I say full property inspection, if it's your first day as a property manager, you need to make sure that you've gone through and you understand the basic layout of your property. All the amenity areas are walked through. You need to know what you're managing, right? And so the next thing, number 4 on my 10 things you must do when you take over a new property is inspect all vacant units. And you want to make sure that when you do this, you're checking the problem units. So why are units sitting too long? What's wrong with them? Why aren't they renting? Or have they not been turned over, and why not? And that all becomes part of your plan that we're going to talk about in a minute. This is all leading up to a plan. So you're doing all this back work, getting the rent roll, getting the lease files in place. You're collecting keys and access. You're doing a property inspection. You're walking all your vacant units, and you're verifying any problem units to begin with. And you're sending a notice, or depending on the size of the property, you're sending or you're posting notices or both to every single occupied unit so they know that you are the manager. So even though maybe the management company didn't change, but they hired you to take over a property, and that's your property now, and you need to notify all tenants that you took over that property, that you're the new manager that's responsible for that community or that property, or whether it be even a commercial property, that those tenants know who you are. So they need to be notified. And next, of course, you want to set up the rent collection and accounting systems. And what that means is if you're taking over a property that already has that, maybe they're using Appfolio or Yardi or Buildium, or maybe they're just simplifying it with like QuickBooks or something like that. Some people do that as well. Whatever that is, you need to get familiar with that. So in the place that something's already set up, you need to familiarize yourself with it. If it's not set up, you're just taking over a 2 or 4 unit property that you own, make sure you have everything entered into the system and make sure everything reflects the proper rent roll and the lease audit that you performed. and whatnot. So that is number 6. Now we're on to number 7, where you're going to review all vendor contracts and all services. This is also the time where you're going to review what staff you have on, familiarize yourself with their pay and hours and things like that. So I pull every single vendor file, every single active vendor file, and every single contract that is specifically for this new property. You need to know what you're paying for trash. When does that contract expire? Because some contracts automatically renew, and maybe you don't want it to automatically renew. Maybe they're doing a poor job, or maybe their price is ridiculous, and the last managers just hired somebody real quick because they needed to switch. But now's the time to put that on your list, right, for that plan that we're going to talk about in a minute. So you want to do all this stuff leading up to a plan. So you're going to do all vendor contracts and services. Make sure the hallways are being cleaned. If there's a contract that's in place, make sure that those hallways are being cleaned properly. If you're paying, a couple $100 or $1,000 a month to get hallways cleaned, make sure they're actually doing it. And so this is your vendor review time. This is when you start digging into the guts of the property. Landscaping, are they doing a good job? Are they edging the sidewalks? Details matter, right? And so you want to get rid of vendors who aren't living up to the contract, or definitely put them on notice that you walked the property, which you should have done right at step 3. So you're telling them, I walked the property and your services are unacceptable, and I read your contract and they're not. You're just not doing a great job. And so you want to put them on notice or just replace them depending on how bad they're doing. And so next is you want to make sure that your property's in compliance. All risk related things are addressed in this step 8. And so you want to make sure that there's no safety risks. You want to make sure your fire alarm systems are operating, your elevators have the proper certificate of operation. This is the time when you make sure your property is in full compliance. There's certain areas that fire marshal can show up at any time and say, where's all this information? And if you can't provide it, your property is going to get a citation. So it's important to make sure that whether you keep a 3-ring binder of all the copies of the certificates that you need, so they're all in one place. So if a codes guy walks into your rental office today, you can pull it out and say, boom, here's everything that you need to see. You can review our 3-ring binder, and if you need copies, they'll make some copies for you. But the property is in compliance. But you need to make sure that it is, and that you have a one-spot stop to verify that it's in full compliance. MSDS sheets, all the things that you need. If you're storing hazardous chemicals on the property, maybe it's a pool situation, or the cleaning supplies or paint, whatever might be considered hazardous chemicals, make sure you have those sheets. Make sure you have everything in one binder, so if somebody asks you a question, you just pull out that binder. Your property needs to be in compliance. And then one more step before we get to the big plan, and that is that you meet with all staff, right? And key vendors. So if you haven't met with the vendors yet, the ones you're using all the time, this is the time to meet with them. If it's like a 2-unit property, you're not going to have one staff maintenance guys, especially at that property. But that's when you need to make sure your vendors, say you just took over a property and you don't have a vendor list yet, this is your time when you build that vendor list, right? You need to make sure that they have proper certificates of insurance, that you have a proper filled out W-9 form so that you can send them their tax form every year. And so this is when when you're supposed to be meeting with it. But if you don't have them set up, maybe you do that in place of number 7. But at some point here, what I always did with my vendor list is for each item that I'm doing purchasing services on, I have 3 vendors for that. Even if I mainly use like the number 1's my go-to guy for plumbing backups, then I still have two more, because what if he's away, or he can't get to it for 2 days because there's a major storm, or whatever, things come up. And you need to make sure that just because you have a preferred vendor doesn't mean you shouldn't have two backup vendors. And so that's just one example, and we'll dive into that on another video. But number 9 is meet with staff and key vendors, set expectations, communicate rules. This is also where I like to do, on day one, what I like to do is when I sit down with my maintenance guys, I'll actually sit there, not sit there, I'll stand there. This is called a stand-up meeting. I'll make sure they understand that every day we do a 15-minute stand-up meeting. And so everyone stands, no one's sitting. And each day we set the expectations for that day, and we go over, hey, this is a reminder. This is what I'm expecting to be done today. And if we spend 15 minutes every morning talking about the expectations on that property, there's no reason for us to be chit-chatting in the property and wasting the property owner's money and time, right? We need to make sure that we're working. And so otherwise, you have email, text message, you have work order updates. So we shouldn't really have to talk the rest of the day. And you shouldn't be out talking on the property for an extended periods of time. There's properties that get reviews that, hey, the staff's always standing around talking. Well, setting this 15-minute stand-up meeting every morning at your property is how you stop that from happening, right? Everyone stands up, everybody's energized and ready for that day, and they know the expectations because you set them every morning. And so, if there's a new rule you want to implement, that's the time to do it. And so this all leads up to one big thing. When you take over a property, you should set up a 90-day action plan. So, that's why you're doing these other 9 things first, because, you're kind of letting everybody know you're there. You're reviewing everything and becoming familiar with it. You're taking notes of things that need attention. And so this all builds up to, okay, now I have to set a 90-day plan of what I'm going to do with this property. Even if you just took over, you're buying your first property and it's a 2-unit or 4-unit property, you need a 90-day action plan. What do you need to resolve in the first 90 days? What vendors do you need to replace? What new vendors do you need to hire? What is wrong at the property? What are your goals and expectations? Where do you want to take this property in 90 days? And it goes to, for a property manager who just took over a 200 or 300 unit apartment complex, right? You have to set your 90-day action plan, your goals for that property. What are you going to do to that property? Even if it's a great property, maybe it's even a new build. Well, then you have your problems are a little different, right? You don't have a lot of maintenance issues, but you might have a lot of vacancy because you're in the middle of a lease up, right? You're trying to fill that property and get the occupancy rates up. And so, is there a budget on the property? Have you ever done a budget on this property? Is there one existing now? If not, that becomes part of the action plan. You need to set a budget. You can't operate a property with no idea of money coming in and how you plan to spend that money. So this is the 90-day action plan. You're setting leasing plans, repair priorities, capital improvements, operational fixes. You need to execute that plan within 90 days. And I always say that I'm a checklist guy, so I love having a 90-day plan. But after that 90 days, I set another 90-day plan, right? Because I like knowing that I have expectations and goals for my properties, whether I own them or I'm managing them. I'm probably harder on myself than the owner is on me, because I set high expectations and I try to push my numbers as far as I can to make sure that the property is operating at its best. And, that also is giving yourself some leniency. Everything's not going to be done on day one. It's going to take time, especially if it's deferred maintenance property. You're going to have to do a lot of stuff to solve issues on that property. So anyway, I hope if you're taking over a new property that this video helps you in determining what you need to do. This is what I do on my properties. And please like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next video.